Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of getting started with Xamarin here at BGRS in Toronto. And so last week we had part 1. We just talked about Xamarin Forms, mainly getting started, how to install. And today we're going to try to dive deeper, get more technical, and just really see how annoying and difficult Xamarin development is, and not because it's Xamarin, but because it's mobile, and so it obviously comes with its complications. So a quick refresher of what we did last week. We spoke a little bit about hybrid versus cross-platform. What the difference was. We spoke about why Xamarin is so good because you actually have access to the native APIs, and it looks like this instead of being an HTML page that's rendered using JavaScript. It's the actual text boxes that that iOS and Android actually provide, rather than pixels on the screen and stuff like that. And we went over Xamarin Native versus Xamarin Forms, about how Xamarin Forms is super awesome, and you can create pages and views super quick, super fast, comparatively super fast, not super fast. And we spoke about the fact that we are using Xamarin Native in all 6 apps that we have, and so that provides its own complications. Yes, we are able to share a common backend, but the UI we have to do natively. So for iOS, we have to use Storyboards. For Android, we have to use XML files or layout files, and we'll actually see all that today in working. And then, we spoke about how there were pages, layouts, and views. And it is still relevant today because we will be talking, and I will try to explain the current stuff in terms of pages, layouts, and views. So pages, like we said, was the top layer. And then inside a single page, you can have multiple layouts. You can have, horizontal carousel. Inside the page, you can have, stuff stacked in a certain way. You can make that page scroll. So those are the different layouts. And then views are basically buttons or, edit text boxes or text labels. And then we went over how to install, and then we said, okay, after installation, what do you do? So we opened it. We were able to, you open Visual Studio once it's installed. You select a blank Forms app. You put a name and you say create, and then you hit the play button, and you basically created your first app. So today we're going to go over creating a jokes app in Forms, and then if we have time towards the end, we'll do it in native. But the purpose of this would be to understand the fact that you guys can go home and actually play around with this, and it doesn't take that much work in order for you to do that. One of the few things that you have to do is you have to install an external library in C# or .NET World. It's called a NuGet package. And then you have to use something called HTTP requests. If you don't know about .NET, that's what they use for basically making calls to stuff in the internet. Because once you have your app, you want to be able to communicate with the outside world, and so you need the HTTP request. And then one thing that Xamarin uses a lot is called dependency injection. So, and this kind of shows what it means. Essentially, if you say button on, or if you say a label on Xamarin in iOS, it actually uses a UI label, and on Android, it actually uses text view. And we'll go over that a little bit. So let me show you guys it in working.
Dependency injection is implementation of inversion of control pattern. So this is a design pattern that is used here, and basically means you can flip the implementation depending on what you are running or the code.
Yeah.
This is a short explanation.
For some reason, this annoying thing is in the way, but we'll just ignore it for now. What we're going to do initially is we're going to create two labels, or hey.
Cross that out, right?
Say that again?
You can cross that out, right?
Yeah, you can. I wish it was that easy. This won't go away. Okay. Anyway, so I bring in two labels, and then I, bring in a button. This is just copied stuff. You can go to my GitHub and find it. You can get all this code from there. And then you'll notice over here is that there's a button over here. What did we say a few minutes ago? That in Xamarin, it uses dependency services to change that from what we are calling a button to UI button if you're building an iOS app, and a text label if you're using a normal button. That's what they call it on Android. And then every button has a clicked event. So if you say, over here, we're basically creating a button instance using this code. We're instantiating a button. And then we're taking that variable, and then we're calling there's several events that it has. One of them is the clicked event. So we're assigning this clicked event to this function over here. We're saying, okay, go ahead and do this. You get several squiggly lines. One of them is because it's like, hey, you have to use this library in order to use HTTP client. So it basically makes a service call as soon as you press the button, and this is the API that it calls. So if you just copy this and you go over here into the browser, you guys will be able to just essentially see the joke. Okay, but you're basically making it look better because you're putting it in an app and making it look fancy. So first of all, you have to, like I said, you have to add a external package called a nuget package. So I'm going to say right click on this, manage nuget packages. It's called Newton.soft.json. It basically helps you convert the JSON text. Hey, what? Why unable to get depository information? Yeah, let's see, it should still work. Come on, guys, don't do this to me. No, heartbreak. Okay, anyway, let's assume that it actually works. In the case that it actually works, what it'll do is that it'll convert. No, I should have internet.
You have?
But yeah.
Depends what type of internet you have.
Because I have employees access, so I should be able to connect to like different websites. It's not restricted in that sense. Yeah. Anyway, so basically the error that I'm getting over here is that it cannot add this package, and it's saying that it cannot get signature information. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm not going to waste too much time on this. I'm just going to try to add an older version. If that doesn't work, we'll just continue. It doesn't matter. Here. So 11.0.2. Check. No, it can't. That's fine. No problemo. We'll just continue. But essentially, if we hit play, it should build the app and it should work. And you already have your jokes app. just a few lines of code, and bam. Okay, so going back to the presentation, second part. Now you guys know how to work with Xamarin Forms, and you kind of know how to work with the internet, to get a joke. So, we're going to move forward with how we do our mobile development. Now, when you work with Xamarin Native, you actually have to write the code twice. So what we wrote only one time, where we said, okay, button and label, you have to write it twice. So you have to go into, so this was our Forms project, our Forms solution, and then this solution over here is our native solution. So you'll notice in our view controller that we actually, come on. I want to close. Why does it do this to me today? Okay, so you'll notice there's an iOS project and an Android project. Last time we didn't have anything inside these projects, but this time we have something called a view controller. And when you double tap on it, you'll notice how it says, oh, view controller. And I'm going to expand so you guys see it. Let me close this because you guys won't be able to see any of this. With this like annoying thing. This. I can't ignore this.
Can you close this?
No, I can't. Oh, there we go. Okay. But this still isn't.
Can you just try pressing open?
No, here, open.
It opens the string.
I'm pressing escape. It's not even escaping. Okay.
Okay, whatever. It's better than before.
Let me quit, and then let me start again.
Yeah.
Quit. I hope it doesn't like occupy my entire screen. Visual Studio. Okay. So anyway, and we're gonna get to it, but inside Xamarin Forms, what we called pages on iOS, it's referred to as a view controller. And so they have different names, and using dependency service, that page actually uses a view controller in the background. And then on Android, on the other hand, it uses a combination of activities or fragments. And we'll talk about them in more depth a little later, but just notice that they have different names, and on Android there's you could use either an activity or a fragment for a page. Okay, and then on iOS, what you call a UI table view, on Android you call a list view. So tables are essentially the same as lists on iOS and Android. And then in iOS, it's called a UI toolbar. On Android, it's called an action bar. iOS is called a UI label. Android is called a text view. So these are usually whenever there's a developer who is an iOS developer, if he tries to go onto Android, he gets really confused. He's like, okay, what's going on? I don't understand, why are you calling a table a list view? Or why are you calling a list a table? And so, they basically use different terminology, and there's quite a few differences even in when you dig in deeper. And Xamarin Forms essentially tries to hide all those differences and just gives you like a canvas to work with and simplifies it significantly. So going back over here, perfect, it's gone. Notice how over here we created a new class called view controller, and this is just it inherits from a UI view controller, so that's its type. It's a type of UI view controller. So there are certain things called lifecycle functions, app lifecycle functions. So whenever it comes to the view controller, the first thing it will do is it will run these lifecycle functions. So this lifecycle function gets called whenever the page is loaded. So then there's different types of lifecycle functions too. So, it basically says, okay, when the button is tapped, set the title of the button to be something else, and, it basically counts the number of clicks. So, where does this whole UI get set up? So if you go to the storyboard, and there's two different ways of, actually 3 different ways of creating UIs for iOS, which is why it's such a pain. It is so painful to develop mobile apps in general. And for iOS in particular, it's pretty annoying because of the different ways that you can actually create a view control, like a page or a view controller. And one of them that they're using over here is called a storyboard. The one that we use in our office is XIBs, or Xcode interface builders, which are individual files instead of an entire storyboard. But they look very similar. The third way that's pretty popular is just programmatically do it. So while it's opening, yes, okay. So programmatically, basically you have to say, okay, this item is over here, and you give it coordinates, and that item is there, and you have to connect everything. So it's my, like, I prefer to do it, but it's not generally for professional purposes. So notice over here, we opened the storyboard in Xcode interface builder. So you have to use Xcode in order to actually build this. And for anyone who's trying to get into mobile development, especially iOS native development, you'll be dealing with Xcode all the time.
Is it normally this slow?
It is normally slower than this.
Beach ball of death.
It is very, very, very slow.
Yikes.
Yeah. So either way, if you notice how on Xcode, they've given you this canvas, and there's different panes everywhere. One of the most important panes for us is this one over here. It basically shows you the entire hierarchy of your view controller. And the most difficult part, I would say, of all of it is constraints. So figuring out how to build constraints, especially when you have different items. If you notice over here, there's the button. This is a button. So we're saying that the center of that, the X center of the button and the Y center of the button should be equal to the center of the entire page, which it's not. And that's just because it hasn't refreshed the page. So I pressed the refresh button and it came to the center. Okay? But now, let's say we want to add some text over here. So I say, add a label. Man, it took me a long time to learn all of this stuff. So I wouldn't blame you guys if it doesn't make sense for you right now, but just know that this is how it is actually done.
So if you do this, does this get reflected in the code that you just wrote?
When I save it.
Okay.
When I save it, it will get reflected. So I just save it, and and then if I run, it will get reflected. But over here, I added a new label. Notice that I haven't added any constraints to it. So if I want to add a constraint, I tap on this button and I say, okay, I can either say it's 150 pixels from the left, or I can say, make sure that it is, wait, cancel. Let's see.
So quick question, can you theoretically not even code and just build a whole app just through this interface?
You could build the UI through this interface, but in order to connect the tap functionality with something, you need this. So
You need what?
you need the code, yes. So notice how there's this button over here But in order to make the tab function do something,
Yeah.
it,
Okay.
it brings it up over here.
Got it. Okay.
And also notice how, it's a partial class essentially. So there's, this other partial class that contains that button, and which is connected to your storyboard.
So
But the label was not connected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a connection.
So basically, Xcode has a graphical designer for
Yes.
iOS.
Yeah.
So
A drag and drop graphical designer.
can you do the graphical design for iOS without Xcode?
You could do it with Visual Studio, but Visual Studio's graphical designer is usually has a lot of bugs. But you can also do it programmatically. It's not a graphical designer, but you can create the UI programmatically. You cannot, do this drag and drop stuff that we're doing over here. So for example, some of the other things that we can drag and drop are like a slider. So we just, drag the slider over here, and then you're able to, connect that slider essentially with your app. Anyway, so this is basically how, and notice how it also kind of got updated over here. And so when I try to build it, I say iPhone 8, and I click on build. It takes some time to build the app. It might actually give me an error. Yeah, and then there's quite a few items while it's building we can check out. You can add an image, a date picker, tab bar, things like that.
So can you also import maybe special libraries into that or no?
You can, but what's the preferred way of doing it is to just leave it out of this and do those special libraries programmatically. Yeah, so it just built, and if you notice, it actually has a slider, and I can also increase the size of the slider, to make it bigger if I wanted to. And then if I wanted to change the color of this, I could also do that here. So you can increase the font size, you can change this, you can say what kind of text it is, truncation, and things like that. And then remember that click functionality. So there's no function over here that controls the click, and so you have to use Xcode. You have to use Visual Studio to actually say, okay, this is what the click does. So anyway, we spoke a little bit about how they're different, and then we dug a little bit into iOS. We spoke about how there's storyboards, and we talked about a little bit about auto layout. So essentially, making sure that it's in the center, and you are able to create constraints. So if you right click, you can say new constraints. You can create constraints, relative to each other. So you can say whenever this slider, so you hold control and you connect it to the button, and then you can say, okay, space it, make sure that it's centered horizontally with respect to it. Make sure that it's centered vertically with respect to it. So you can do a lot of stuff like that. Anyway, so auto layout is quite a huge challenging part of iOS development, native development. iOS also is known for its terrible documentation. It does have documentation, but it doesn't really have examples and things like that. There's also a very stringent process of building the app. So a lot of times you have to have the right certification from Apple developer account to actually build the app. And so a lot of times it'll just fail if you're using Visual Studio. If you're using Xcode, you generally don't have those issues. also, you need to have a Mac to build the app and deploy it. There are ways around it, but for the most part, you need to have a Mac for Apple development, which is also a great thing for developers here because a lot of countries where they can't afford a Mac, so there are not a lot of developers from there. So hey, there's a lot of opportunities for Apple developers. So it's a good thing to actually get into. Hint, hint, Joey. Provisioning profiles and certificates. So when you're trying to publish the app, a thing that very often occurs is that it says, hey, if you're not going to be able to publish this app because you don't have the right bundle signing authority. So if you go over here, if you want to distribute it, you don't have a provisioning profile for this app. Developer, yes, you can, develop the app, put it on a phone, but in order to distribute it, you have to go to, in order to actually transfer the file. So a lot of Android users know that you can just download an APK file from anywhere on the internet and you can just install that app. But iOS doesn't let you do that, and the reason is the whole provisioning profile and certification process.
So you have to pay $100 a year.
Yes, you have to pay
$100 a year?
$100 a year for iOS development. Android development, on the other hand, you have to pay only $25 for one time.
One time.
Yeah.
That's why I have paid account for Android, not for Apple.
So if you work here, does BGRS pay for that for you?
Yeah, not for me. They have an account that has so many apps, so they have to pay for it every year. I mean, on the other hand, Android has had a lot of slack because of the fact that a lot of accounts have just been flagged, blacked out, and so they can't do anything with their apps anymore. Their account just gets deleted. So there's a lot of issues on the Android side of things that iOS does not have in that sense, also because of its stringent process. Anyway, so moving on to Android, you remember we had, in Xamarin Forms, we didn't really have this drag and drop kind of thing that Storyboards has. We did have the ability to either do it using C# in code or XML. Android has something called AXML. That's how they do it natively. You have these layout files. So if you go to your Android project, you go to resources, layouts, main.axml. It'll load, it'll try to install a bunch of things. But essentially, it shows you this stuff over here. This AXML file or the layout file is where all your UI generally stays. And again, you have the ability to create UI through code, but most commonly you do your UI through these AXML files. And these AXML files are a lot easier than iOS, significantly easier to deal with. So what is this main.axml file connected to? If you look over here, you have your main activity file. Inside your main activity, again, you have these lifecycle functions. The lifecycle function is called differently. On iOS, it was view.did.load, but in Android, you have a different set of names. So the one that we care about right now is called onCreate. I don't know whose phone it is. Whose phone is that?
That's fine.
Okay. Anyway, so in the onCreate lifecycle function, we basically set the view to this layout. We say, okay, take the layout from here. And then we reference the button from this layout file. So you see this button over here. And let me get the split back. Oh yeah, there we go. So we can't drag and drop, but we can view what's going on over here. So if you click on the button, it'll show you exactly which button we're talking about. Okay? And then if you click on the linear layout, it'll have the exact layout. So remember how we had pages, layouts, and views? So this is basically the layout for that page. And this is the view. The button is the view. So you have a layout, and you have a view inside that layout, and this layout is used by this page, essentially, called main activity. So in this example, and I'm going to try to run it, in this example, wait, how are we doing on time? Yeah, pretty good. Okay, so in this example, they're putting everything inside an activity. And a lot of tutorials out there also use this older style, older system of activities. The newer style is to mainly use a fragment and just place that fragment inside an activity. So your activity is not going to have any UI. Your fragment is going to have your UI, and then you just place that fragment inside an activity, but you have an activity for sure. It's kind of complicated, but nevertheless, that's the way they do it.
Is it just to make it more modular so you can have multiple fragments within the activity?
Yes, it is. That's the purpose. But they've also, decided to use it for everything now. Like, all the pages are just going to be called fragments. So you're going to have one activity, and then you just replace fragments, You place one fragment over the other. Huh?
Why is that the new standard? Is it easier to develop that way, or what's the reasoning?
Kind of reminds me of Angular for some reason.
They decided that, they needed something more standard. And like for a very long time, at least until like 4-5 years ago, there was, everyone was just using activities everywhere. They're like, okay, you click this button, it goes to this new activity, And then they were like, okay, no, you know what, we're just going to standardize it so that, because some people were using, you click the button, it replaces the activity, it places a new activity, fragment over. But they were like, okay, no, we're just going to standardize it. We're just going to have one or two maximum, number of activities, and then we just replace fragments over it. So, for example, in our app, Relo Access, we have a login activity, and then we have a customer activity or a client activity. And then all those other pages are just placed on top of that activity or replaced. So looking over here, as you guys see, this is an emulator that I built it onto. I click on this button, and it says one click. Notice how I was able to connect the button with the activity using this ID. So I said, find a button with this ID. This is the ID, find a button, and the click event of that button. So if you see dot, it has all these events. Specifically, it has a drag event, hover event, but the click event, when the button is pressed, update the text as shown. Anyway, so one of the super major challenges in Android is that there's a lot of deprecated APIs. So remember how we talked about fragments and activities? Even that is deprecated. Even that should not be used anymore. Instead of activities, we have to start using app compat activities. And instead of fragments, we have to use v4 fragments. So what does that look like? So over here, instead of activity, you have to say app compat activity. Even though all the tutorials out there say, hey, hey, what?
They don't have.
Rx equals app compat.
It doesn't have. Even typing app doesn't show it.
Yeah. Either way, let me see. That's strange. But, instead of using a list view like we talked about, we have to use something called a recycler view.
So is it just the naming convention has been changed, or?
No. So the naming convention, it's not the naming convention, it is the functionality. So
basically, iOS and Android, they have separate programming models, like what Samir was explaining in the beginning, and how they correspond to each other in terms of names. So what they are doing, they are actually they mature the programming model, and of course they deprecate because the hardware changes and stuff.
Yeah, and
It's very dynamic industry, and they need to deprecate all the elements of the programming model and introduce new ones.
yeah. So for example, like the activity was not able to have the bottom navigation views at all. Remember the bottom navigation tabs? That was not supported by activity. And several other newer features, newer design patterns, for UI are not supported by activity. And so you'd have to do a lot of, complex code and like external libraries and all that stuff for something as simple as a bottom navigation view. And so, essentially they're like, no, here's app compat activity has all these newer features. And this one is still current, even though it's from 2015. And then recycler view, so list view, in order to make the scrolling super fast and super easy, super fluid, you know how when you're scrolling through like some really good apps, you can see like it's not very laggy. So recycler view basically recycles the same layout, same view, and it just changes the text really fast. So in order to make list views do that, it was a very complicated way. And so they're like, okay, we're just going to use recycler view from now on. Similarly, if you look on the top over here, this thing is called the action bar. And even that was deprecated like a long time ago. And we're actually using a toolbar. It has different names, but what that does is that makes it very difficult for newer developers to build Android apps that will last. So if someone who's a senior comes in, he can easily tell, hey, these guys didn't really know that you have to use these deprecated APIs, and then because the app is so big, it becomes very, very challenging to import all of this stuff to a newer design pattern. So it's very challenging. And then one of the other challenges is key store files. So if you've made an app, and it's a brand new app, you have one key store file. But if you lose that key store file, you have to delete the app from the App Store and create a new app. So maintaining that key store file is very, very critical and unnecessarily, almost, you can say. It doesn't even do a great job.
The first time took me a day to
Figure out your key store file?
to create my key store file.
Yeah, so it's just something annoying with Android and super useless.
You
in my
have to
opinion.
install Java on your computer and stuff, and oh my god, it took a day.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, if you lose it, you basically have to delete the app and create a new one. Also, some minor changes, you have to delete the app and create a new
How do you
one.
lose it?
It's just a file.
So basically, the app stores are there is demand for them to be trusted, because if the Google Play Store or Apple App Store are not trusted, nobody will get apps from there. So they had to introduce lots of registration and maintenance of these developer accounts, especially for organizations, not only for individual developers. In order to be, it's the same thing for iOS. For example, you have a certificate. So this certificate, it's well protected on Apple website. But for Android, I don't think you have to build it locally and keep it that way. So basically, this is your authentication of publishing the app. That means having that is it's confirmation. It's your identity as a developer. So this app is yours, right? So that's why they put these things.
Yeah. So if you noticed how I also made a few quick changes in this page. I'm going to try to stop it and play it again. But inside this linear layout, inside the layout, I created another view called a text view, and it asked me for the width. The width I said is just going to match the parent width, which is the linear layout. The height is just going to wrap the content. I centered the gravity towards the center of the page. I set the size. I added background color of white. I added text color of red, and I said the text is this. So now, if you guys look at it, it's updating a little bit. You guys will notice that the page actually opens. And one thing you guys will notice, something that we're trying to use in our company is something called Zeppelin. And man, this is slow. So if you notice, JSON yes actually loaded, and it looks exactly like that. What we're trying to use in our company is this thing called Zeppelin. What you can do with this is you can tap on one of these and it'll show you the XML. And you basically, Naria, if you can see, you just basically copy that and you paste it over here, and it makes it look exactly like that. And you copy this, paste it over there. One thing that helps a lot is that if you look at this 24 dp, so it'll tell you what is the distance from the left of the screen. What is the distance of this from the right of the screen? 5 dp, So this really helps with making picture perfect UIs. And
does it scale with the screen?
If you select it to scale at the screen, it will. But right now, it's not.
It's hard-coded.
It's giving you incorrect. So it says 4 SB, it's actually 12 SB or something like that. So I have to multiply by 3 for everyone. It's just because we haven't imported it properly, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. Anyway, so pros and cons of Xamarin Native versus native development. You can build the apps in C# for Xamarin Native, and you can use most of the .NET standard APIs. As you guys saw, that HTTP client stuff, the whole Visual Studio usage. Like, you can't do that with the others, but with Xamarin you can. You can get 2 apps done essentially with one developer because the developer doesn't need to know 2 different languages. You have access to all the native platform libraries out of the box. So you're actually using activities. You're not using some weird abstraction of it. You're using the exact platform libraries. You can follow all the native tutorials and documentation. So I just look for any documentation from Android or iOS, and I basically use that. And also there's a close-knit community of developers, and a lot of companies are adopting it. With native development, you cannot readily use native libraries from CocoaPods and Maven. So CocoaPods, essentially, if you want to do, I guess, machine learning, there's like a library that someone built on iOS. You can't really do that. You have to bind that library, and it's a little difficult to do that process. Also, there's not as many developers doing Xamarin as there are doing Android or iOS native. Architecture, we'll go over this really quick. So, and I'll try to set a few minutes for questions, but a common architecture that is commonly used is called MVVM, where you have the view model, and the model. So the view is basically the activity or the view controller that you guys saw, or the page. A view model is another page that basically feeds the information that needs to be shown. And we don't use this model in our Reload Access app, but we do use this model for the other apps that we have. It makes coding pretty challenging because we basically, and also there's supposed to be different layers. The services layer is what makes all the service calls.
So Xamarin Forms is actually MVVM.
Yes, Xamarin Forms helps you with MVVM out of the box. But we're using Xamarin Native, So the Relo Access app in particular doesn't, is not the best for sharing code. So we are not following proper standards for what we should be. And we tried to implement it, but only for one page. We have a ton of other pages that we are not using it for. So I'm hoping, at least in the stuff that I'm doing, that we actually implement it. Moving forward, there's different frameworks that help you with MVVM, and on the BGRS Guide app, we actually do use MVVM Cross to help us with it. So if you look at the BGRS Guide app, we have 4 different projects: iOS, Android, and then we have the core project, the shared project, into services layer and the view model layer.
The portable one.
Yeah, these are portable class libraries. So for each view model, there will be one iOS view, and there'll be one Android view. So you click on view controllers, you'll see there's a ton of view controllers. And then as we spoke, for example, on BGRS Guide, there's something called the acknowledgement page, which is basically the acknowledgement view controller. There's a zip file that contains, the Xcode UI, essentially. So if you right-click, say, open an Xcode interface builder, you'll see the UI in Xcode, basically. And so you'll have the same acknowledgement page in Android as well, under fragments. Wherever acknowledgement is, I don't see where acknowledgement is placed. Wait. Yeah, but notice how there's like fragments and there's activities. So it's kind of confusing over there. It's like, okay, when do you use fragments? When do you use activities? But iOS is clear over there. But in terms of view models, there's going to be one view model for that page. So under the view models project, click on view models, and you'll see the acknowledgement page over here. Anyway, so moving back, and then the Move Expert app uses MVVM Lite. So another good library to use MVVM, but Relo Access does not use MVVM at all. App Center.
MVVM Cross is very old. It's almost since Xamarin is out.
Yeah, and it's still like they still get a lot of donations. Like they require only $2,000 donations every year, but they get like 6,000. They have pretty good support. Yeah. And these guys are in, I don't know, somewhere in Europe, and they even got accepted into the .NET Foundation because of their consistency. Very, very solid group of guys. And you message them on Twitter, and they'll like tweet back at you within 3-4 hours. It's pretty solid, even though you don't even pay them. Microsoft's App Center is something pretty solid that we use for our mobile development. It's really good for CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment. We don't use it in that way. We probably should. It's really good for diagnostics and bug tracking, analytics, push notification, and distribution of the app.
So what do we use it for?
We use it for diagnostics, bug tracking, and for analytics. And I'm going to show you guys in a little bit.
Yeah, so we already had the chat about this, but before App Center, there was Hockey app that was used for mainly for distribution, but it had also tracking and stuff, analytics. So they had Xamarin insights and stuff. So they acquired Hockey app and Xamarin. I think first Xamarin and then Hockey app.
Yes.
And GitHub was the last. And what they started this transition from Hockey app, and it's still on the roadmap. And in the middle of last year, they allowed the first trial use of App Center. You can create only one project or something like that.
Yeah.
Generally available App Center became in January this year. So it's like 11 months ago. It's pretty new.
Yeah.
But they are investing very aggressively in it, and
Yeah. Yeah, so moving forward, this is the Reload Access Android App Center page. So if you notice, it says connect to repo. So this is where the CI/CD should be. This is one of my personal projects. So it basically connects to your repository, and you're able to say, okay, build this, and it'll perform a UI test against that build. And then you can distribute it essentially. So it's pretty solid. Most companies use it, but we don't because we don't have Azure DevOps yet. And over here, if you had it, it would also do like a UI test, and it would say, oh, the test passed. This is what we use for releasing it. So for QA, whenever they need to access the app, they will just log into appcenter.ms, and I manually upload these builds. So they can download the Android or the iOS app from here directly. And I spoke about how we have diagnostics in over here. So if you look over here, it shows us how many crashes there are. So wait, give me 1 second. Just guide. So 41 crashes, 6% of the users in the last 60 days. So we go to the last 90 days, and we're going to compare to BGRS guide. Okay, so BGRS guide, we've been having a lot of issues because we did not we did not publish the latest version, and so we will compare it. But 152 crashes in 90 days. So basically, like 1.5 crashes a day, almost 8% of the users have been affected. They actually give you exactly what the crash description is. It says, okay, argument null exception, null reference exception. Usually the most common exceptions are null reference exceptions. It gives you the version number.
Is that usually due to API just failing to give you data and then you're just like,
Exactly.
It's very
true.
Very easy for troubleshooting. It's before
Yeah.
App Center, it was troubleshooting, especially for iOS.
yikes.
For iOS, you can here give me what was called for iOS, not crash dump, but something similar.
Yeah, it wasn't that good at all. Even now, it's not good for the native crash analytics. But if you look at this, there's 746 crashes compared to 150. So we're doing pretty well.
It's going down.
It's going down. Definitely is going down. I mean, lately we've had several issues, but we're trying to keep that in check. And this is also a good reason why we have really bad reviews on some apps.
What's our review at the moment?
I think it's like 1.3 or something like that.
Out of 5?
Yeah. So anyway, if you look at this particular crash, you can dig in. It says, okay, the report was from here. You can click on the events. Oh, it doesn't show you, but generally it'll show you exactly which page they came from. Let's go here. Let's see. I know we're going over time, but maybe 5 more minutes. I'll just show you guys this. And then also one of the things that you can do is that you can go to analytics. So you click on analytics, it'll load while it's loading. Go to reports. Try to look for a report.
So in order to get these nice things, some of them, you have to use the App Center SDK.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty simple to implement. But notice over here, it shows us how many users we've had. Every day we have around 31. Every week we have around 434, 424. This is how they've been using it. We don't know about 1,000 of them, but majority of people are using the app for 1 to 30 minutes every day.
So
not every day.
Basically, this is what you would get with Xamarin Insight before.
Why is it unknown?
Yeah, what happened to...
Maybe it just didn't give the data, or they didn't allow data to be given. Yeah, certain data they won't collect. So the average sessions per day is 1.5. The average user will open the app more than once. The average user will use the app for 4.5 minutes. pretty good, actually. People are actually using the app. They're not just looking at it and like, oh, cool, this is a cool app. Okay, close. No, they're actually using it. And these are the different countries that they're coming from.
Do we even support all these languages?
No,
No, that's their operating
there's
system.
their operating system is in that language.
They're currently just reading all in English then.
Yeah,
English or French.
but notice how like French is not really the second most spoken language for these guys. Spanish is. Anyway, so adoption, because some people choose not to update their app, so yeah, we don't have the entire thing adopted.
You don't force them to update.
We don't force them to update.
But is there
It's interesting when you
No.
have some location features in the app.
Huh?
It's interesting to correlate this data with your own specific data. If you have some location features in your app
Yeah.
that can see that your user is in UK, and you have information that that user is moving to the States or something like that. So you can see that the services that the user is consuming are actually in the US, and
Yeah,
to get this information, it's very useful for business purposes.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because this comes automatically without any like codeless analytics.
Yeah.
The location of the user. If you allow, if the user allows location tracking, but if you have your own data that you need to publish that with the SDK explicitly, right? Then you can correlate and see different things that probably
Yeah.
the business units will be very interested in.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, so lastly, you can get page views, so you can see which page people are using. So, this page on the BGRS Guide app was opened 20,000 times.
How can it be closed more than it's opened?
That's a very good question. So there's generally like a 10% like error margin that I have seen with App Center.
10%.
Yeah, 10%. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah. Dang. All right. Anyway, yeah. So
Does it count as a close if you press the home button?
Probably, but that still doesn't make sense.
But then if you like open, close, open, close.
But you still have to open
You
it.
still have to open it in order to
Oh,
close it.
true. No, so that, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, that is about it. Anyone have any questions? I know we've gone over by 5 minutes.
We know where you sit.
Yeah, you guys know where I sit. You guys know my email address. You guys can hit me up on Twitter if it's a weekend and I don't have access to my email. But yeah, if anyone doesn't have any questions, I'll give you guys 3 more seconds. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will close the meeting. Appreciate it for your